So hi everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Joni Coker and I will briefly introduce our Efficiency for Access webinar, Solar Powered Water Pumps in Mills, Market Trends and Innovations. This is a webinar for representatives from the energy and agricultural teams from our Efficiency for Access Coalition members. And the objective of this web conference is to share research and learnings from the coalition and start a dialogue to improve coordination across the energy, agriculture, and water sectors. In today's webinar, we'll discuss efficiency for access research on solar milling and hear reflections from Matt Carr, CEO and co-founder of Agsol. Agsol is an efficiency for access research and development grantee that is delivering unique and life-changing solar-powered agro-processing machines. We'll also discuss key learnings from the Coalition's recent research on solar water pumps, as well as sustainable irrigation. Following this, the last half hour of the webinar will be devoted to Q&A. Our speakers today are Makena Ireri, Manager on the Clean Energy Access Team at CLASP, Richa Goyal, Senior Insight Manager and Research Lead at the Energy Saving Trust, and Matt Carr, CEO and co-founder of Agsol. The discussion today will be recorded and the recording and slides will be circulated internally among registrants and coalition members later this week. With that, I'll now hand it over to Makena to get us started.
Thank you, Joni. So as Joni suggests, today we are going to be looking through LEIA research that has touch points on solar milling and solar water pumping, and more inclusively, agricultural technology for productive use. So first we'll give the overall broad picture, and then we'll dive into the milling case, and after solar water pumping. And these resources at the bottom here are where we've drawn a lot of our insights, and all available at the Efficiency for Access website. Next, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Thanks. So the area of productive use, especially for agricultural technologies, is really diverse. And basically, when we say productive use, we are essentially meaning appliances that can be used by the end consumer to either offer a service, increase yield, or extract higher value from their product in order to generate an income. So the classifications are usually around pumping, around cooling or drying processes, and then agricultural processes that are a bit more of a pressing, rotating, cutting. And increasingly, there are newer and more nascent applications that can also be utilized together with solar water pumps. Now, where I'm drawing from the IFC Pulse work, so they released a study last year that really looks into this topic. Just to put a caveat that there they looked at machinery that can be powered by solar home systems up to 1 kilowatt peak. So just to keep that in mind when we are drawing from that. But when we talk when we're including the rest of the machinery, I'll be caveating with kind of what size and how they fit into this landscape of equipment. But just here to show the diversity that exists. Thanks. Next. So in terms of market penetration, productive uses for agricultural technology are still not that prevalent in the market. So by 2018, we only really had most companies selling about 10,000 units. This data that was collected by Dolberg for the Pulse study. And increasingly, we are seeing these numbers go up, but only certain countries seem to have the highest market share. So these increasingly we see that these market shares driven by early stage firms and very specialized distributors, and then large international manufacturers are starting to peak at the market, but not really playing as big of a role. And really the maturity of this productive use equipment for agricultural technology for productive use really varies by type, by geography, by the capacity of the system, and often by the use cases that are put together with this technology. Next, please. So then if we want to look at how the technology is maturing, We can see that irrigation is really what is perceived to be closest to market, having the highest potential for impact, and really at the cusp of scale. Following that is cooling and then milling. Other agricultural processing technologies, especially used together with solar home systems or standalone solar, are really very nascent. So very few examples exist beyond pilots, and they are scattered across the region. So really the focus seems to be on irrigation, cooling, and milling in the first instance, with the others coming behind as kind of nascent prototypes in the market. Next, please. So then, having seen the penetration, the technology, if we want to then think of what is commercially ready, or what is as close to commercial readiness as we would like, you can see here like a heat map of the 3 bits that I've talked about: the pumps, the cooling, and the agro-processing, matrixed with their sizes, where in green we're showing equipment that is really close to market readiness or commercial readiness, meaning that it is affordable, there's enough distributors, really people are seeing the potential there, and the investment is going there. But that kind of peters down as we move towards the red. And the issues here is that in terms of cost and performance, we still have a long way to be competitive with incumbent diesel alternatives, where that is appropriate. The other thing is that there are some specialized applications. They are becoming more and more competitive. So for example, smaller scale water pumps, becoming more and more competitive, but still not reaching the scale that we would expect. And this is usually because of consumer financing constraints, especially for the smallholders that really would benefit from these appliances. And then the other technological kind of issue is that a lot of the ones that, for example, the ones that I showed at the bottom end of technological innovation, they're very energy intensive. And those agricultural activities would require heating or drying, pressing, all of which can be a challenge when you're trying to power them with solar power. Next, please. So now to dive a little bit more deeper into solar milling as one of the options that are really close to market readiness. When we did a pilot with Agsol, and Matt, I think we'll talk about like where that was in terms of the evolution of the company. And this was done from 2018 into 2019, where we tested 10 mills in the field and also did some lab testing to understand the real potential of this kind of new and emerging section of milling. So here you can see the categorization of mills that are currently in operation, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. And also you can see how the power rating varies depending on which application, and also the throughput. So diesel incumbent is, we usually have really high mills, high power rating, high throughput, and that kind of peters down as you look across that chain. So, and at the end of that table, we see a pilot that was just completed with cross-boundary power gen at Agsol, which shows real promise for solar milling. So this was on a mini grid, but you can see that given the power rating and the throughput there's real promise for things that are being tested right now in the market. And really the challenges are the ability to cost compete with diesel, that kind of, especially given the kind of throughputs that we're talking about. And then obviously solar mills come with a balance of plant, which is the PV system, the batteries, and all this kind of increase the price. We won't talk too much about throughput, but this is something that is kind of key in millers, in millers' mind. So people who are milling or who are milling as a business, they put this, 35% put this as their first consideration in purchasing a mill. So how fast am I able to kind of mill, or how much am I able to produce and how fast? Because many customers are not willing to wait, and they're not willing to change their milling habits to kind of accommodate what would be a slower pace of, for example, a solar mill. The other thing worth noting here is that it's not really just about throughput, it's about energy intensity too. And here the solar mill wins out because it uses so much less energy per kg, as noted below, compared to the diesel mill. So it's kind of a balance that needs to exist between the throughput, the efficiency, cost, and kind of making those three things fit together for the appropriate solution. The last point here to note as a challenge is that the availability is really low. Penetration of this appliance in the market isn't high. And we don't find many examples in the field or even many companies investing in kind of trialing this as a technology to be used. There are cases of retrofitting, which also comes with its own challenges because then you kind of create a hodgepodge of a machine where you are trying to kind of balance, for example, a cheap mill that's sourced internationally with a high quality motor, and then off-the-shelf batteries, which can be really expensive. And that really doesn't give you an optimized solution, kind of highlighting the fact that the technology gap still exists. Next, please. So what about the opportunity? Solar mills, or at least milling as a base technology, has been in existence for a long time. People are used to it. It's not something that requires behavioral change, for example, compared to cooking technologies. This is something that people would be easily adapt to, and they are willing to adapt because 95% of the people we interviewed said they were willing to switch to solar mills, even at a little bit of a higher cost than what they currently use. We also know that it has really high impact environmentally, socially, and economically, and I know Matt will touch on some of those. And millers do see this potential. So they noted things to us like the fact that it's clean, meaning that the flour doesn't smell of diesel as would be if they were using a diesel mill, the lower noise generation, the ease in operation, which is particularly interesting when you consider women and girls operate these mills. And then also it's, the safety and eliminating the challenges of sourcing fuel. But we need technological innovation to increase the functionality of each mill. So the mills needs to serve more than one purpose to increase the revenue streams for the miller. So for example, only about half of diesel mills only mill, right? They have other additional functions that come with the mill. So threshing, husking. If it's a solar mill, then that would be the battery would provide electricity for other uses. So the mill kind of needs to be coupled with other things to make it, to diversify those income streams. The appropriate scale is also really important. We have an opportunity really to right size this technology for its intended use. There's kind of a balance between going really big and trying to compete with the incumbent diesel technologies, or downsizing and going small and hitting a more household community-based approach. With affordable solar home systems. So we haven't figured out where the balance lies and what size is appropriate for which use cases, but I think there's an opportunity here to really right size this technology. Again, there's an opportunity to bring down costs, make these devices more affordable using the tech innovations that we've mentioned, but also clever retrofitting, where we are being really conscious about which parts make the most sense, and where we're looking at issues of quality as well, and through financing. And then the other opportunity is that we already know that the business models, especially for the end, for the miller, for the mill operator, those business models exist and are viable. And there's really an opportunity to just tweak them to make them more productive, to make them use a cleaner source of energy, for example, by shifting to use during daylight hours. So all these things kind of give us a chance to kind of tweak a few things about milling to really hit some of this impact potential. Next slide, please. So really the lessons that we have learned from doing this pilot and looking through what others have done in milling is that there is some low-hanging fruit with retrofitting, but that is only applicable in certain contexts and needs to be thought through carefully. we also know that in-field pilots are really crucial to validate this technology, because milling has very cultural components and very specific adaptation. For example, the type of maize that is grown in East Africa different from Asia, and that really changes the technology that you can apply. Also the kind of texture of flour people want and are used to. So there's all this kind of adaptation that needs to be thought about. And in-field pilots are really great at bringing some of this stuff out. It seems more and more that on mini grids, electric mills on mini grids are probably going to reach that golden point faster, where they're able to balance, you know, the cost and throughput, and potentially the efficiency. But I think we should not dismiss solar milling because of its potential to reach really remote areas. It kind of, you know, you have this pseudo free source of energy. You don't have these ongoing tariffs that are associated with mini grids. And also for institutional and community use, it presents a really interesting use case. And so the things that are really interesting to explore in order to kind of take this learning and push this technology forward is a lot of R&D around making the technology the right size, around efficiency in terms of the potential for better and better BLDC motors. I think there needs to be a third-party appliance distribution market that is built up, and that's crucial for consumer financing and to also enable the ecosystem for the manufacturers and other distributors. And then because new technology comes with inherent risk and high costs, incentives are going to play a key role in getting more and more companies to try, or distributors and energy producers to try this technology and offer it to their consumers. And finally, quality assurance is going to be really key, because there's a lot of adaptation, experimentation, and testing going on in both in labs and in the field. And it's important to consider consumer protection as we build the market, and so have some sort of quality markers for the technology that is being put out. Next, please. And with that, I'll hand over to Matt to give us his perspective.
Excuse me. Thanks, Makena. Hi, everyone. First of all, hi. Thanks. Yes, it's Matt here from Agsol. I'm sure many on the call know me and know Agsol, but I understand this call was kind of opening up to some other people in related sectors, and some may not know me. So the first thing I wanted to do, or not know me or nor Agsol, so the first thing I wanted to do is just kind of give a little bit of a background on Agsol. So if we can skip to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I just looked at the date on my computer, and it's nearly been 5 years to the day, actually, about a week off since I got involved in this quest around solar agro-processing. So we started back in 2015. It was myself and my business partner, Greg. We both come from an off-grid energy sector background. Greg also came from a very strong agricultural processing background. So we kind of conceptualized things back in 2015, about 5 years ago, and started building our first product range, which is the picture you can see up the top there. And that product range included retrofitted machines. They were small, typically AC powered machines that we retrofitted with 24-volt DC motors. The range typically split between 250 watts to 800 watts. And we sold those machines as part of packaged units, as plug and play units. We were doing this in Papua New Guinea. There was a very, very nascent kind of solar market just generally there. So we really felt the need to package these products completely. And you know, we had some successes. We over the course of 2.5 or so years, we sold and deployed 800 machines in the Indo-Pacific region. But you know, in doing so, what we learned is that that the products that we were selling were mostly unviable if you ran through the unit economics. Pretty much all of them had been sold through some form of philanthropic or donor-supported mechanism. And a big part of the reason that they were unviable is that because, on the whole, agro-processing machines out there in the market are not suitable to be powered by solar power. Just like Makena was saying before, you know, you start to match a machine with an efficient motor with something else, and you end up kind of creating a bit of a Frankenstein product. And at the core of it, you've got a machine that inherently wasn't designed to be efficient in the first place, because they were designed to be powered from AC and AC grid. So we set about designing our own machine. There's a picture of we just set about designing our own product range. We didn't quite get there, but we made the first iteration of that machine, which you can see in the picture on the lower right. So it was a custom designed hammer mill. We switched to a BLDC motor, which took us up into the 48 volt DC range. And the concept behind that platform was that it would be multifunctional. It would be a common machine platform that could house or accommodate different agricultural machines and or processes. That was something we didn't quite get to. But the other thing that we, you know, in hindsight, being the beautiful thing that it is, one of the other things that we did at that time was we hedged our bets on making a product that could straddle the divide between being suitable for mini grids and in that kind of mini grid power range, and also suitable for standalone solar. And by hedging on that decision, we ultimately made a machine that didn't serve either of those market or those kind of product segments particularly well. So after some trials and tribulations through 2018, I'll try to touch on some of those trials and tribulations in the later section. We released the machine last year. We did the pilot with CLASP and supported by Ireri, and it wasn't particularly successful. And there were different reasons for the reason for why it wasn't successful, but ultimately there was a pretty indisputable fact that we got that product market fit wrong. And so in response, we made a product pivot or kind of more of a product fork in the road, and we reverted back to the retrofitting off-the-shelf machines, which are the machines in the lower center there. And we offer those machines now in DC format with brushless DC motors, or otherwise with AC motors. Those machines we source them from China. They're cheap. There's a lot of manufacturers that offer those machines, and we found manufacturers suppliers that offer better versions than most. And we make a few tweaks on the one on the power drive mechanism, and also within the milling chamber itself. And with those machines, we specifically target, and we will only target customers that include mini grid developers primarily, or where there's a larger DC solar generating infrastructure. Because with a machine at that size and scale in DC format, which comes with a 1.2 kilowatt DC motor. So you're looking at 1.5 to 2 kilowatts of PV to run it, a fairly expensive battery set, and it's very, very difficult to make that work as the unit economics of that work. So we target customers where there's pre-installed energy infrastructure. The other product that we've been working on since, and with the support of E4A and ultimately with different funding, is the micromill, the image that you see in the middle. So we've been working on that for 10 months. This is a completely system design product. It's taking the concept we had and started working on back in 2017 in developing a kind of a machine platform that's going to be able to do multiple things, and we're just miniaturizing it. With the support of E4A, we were able to bring in some really smart talent, and that product includes a whole bunch of new innovation that doesn't exist in any other agro-processing machine on the market. And just to give you a little what that means for the product is that, for example, a standard diesel mill that's available here in Kenya with an electric motor typically has a energy efficiency of about 20 to 25 kilograms. It'll produce 20 to 25 kilograms of flour per kilowatt hour. Our village scale mills that are available will produce at a rate of around 45 kilograms of flour per kilowatt hour. And that new micro mill that you're seeing in the middle is in the range of 80 to 90 kilograms per kilowatt hour. So it's twice as efficient, it's nearly twice as efficient as our kind of larger retrofitted village scale machines, and 3 or more times efficient than the typical machines in the space. Sorry, next slide, please. So in this slide, I just wanted to cover try to cover the dual significance of solar agro-processing. That being, why is it important and why is it so complicated? So why solar ag processing is important, or off-grid agro-processing is important, because there's almost a universal need to process foods in off-grid areas. People in off-grid areas grow their own food, and they grow their own staple foods, and they need to mill it. Their options presently is to use either to process manually or to use a diesel-powered mill. And the problem with diesel mills is that by their very nature, they are large machines, and they set up a semi-centralized network of milling stations which rural people have to access. And that in itself creates a lot of hardship and inefficiencies around how people use their time. The second reason it's important, because there's a lot of money spent around in milling. In a selection of 9 East African countries, we estimate there's over $1 billion USD spent each year at diesel powered hammer mills. And obviously that produces quite a lot of carbon, has quite a carbon dioxide intensity as well. The third point there is that when you look at energy use in off-grid areas, milling represents the highest energy intensive activity or stationary energy application typically in rural areas. So, putting aside mobile energy applications, whether it be vehicles, motorbikes, tractors, etc., milling represents the highest energy use in off-grid areas. So there's a huge opportunity to redirect that energy towards more sustainable and renewable and solar alternatives. And one of the often or very unrecognized factors within the sector is how this plays with the gender dynamic. And it's women are invariably the ones tasked with milling, with off-grid processing, whether that's doing it manually or whether it's putting a sack of 20 kgs of maize on their shoulder and walking 2 hours to the nearest mill and back. And this consumes 10 to 20% of their time, which equates to a huge amount of hours of women's time that is inefficiently used. So for all the importance and significance of solar ag processing, why isn't everyone doing it? And the reason is it's complicated. So first of all, when you look at the productive use appliances that typically form the golden triangle of appliances, which is pumps, refrigerators, and solar milling, mills target the lowest value food crops in the agro-processing, in the agri-value chain, whereas typically pumps and refrigeration is targeting high value food crops, whether that be meat, dairy.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. Could we just wanted to point out the time?
Sorry, sure.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll skip through it. So the other big point is demand. Demand, and as Makena was saying, demand preferences change geographically and seasonally, and the options to go and swap one technology out for another one doesn't exist for solar milling. We're not trying to necessarily replace a diesel-powered mill with a solar-powered equivalent, and that kind of sets solar milling apart from most other appliances that have been brought to the off-grid solar space in the last decade. Similarly, there's no off-the-shelf products that easily fill the need. We can retrofit products, and that's the lowest hanging fruit, as Makena had kind of highlighted before, but it doesn't necessarily hit or solve the bigger problems that the current businesses as usual it creates, and particularly it doesn't solve the access to milling services for rural people. So next slide, please. I'll try and move through this one very quickly, Sarah, I promise. So solar milling, what is the answer? Well, no one really quite knows at the moment. There just really is not enough data to draw solid conclusions, and even with the data that we have available to us, so different conclusions can be drawn. So, Makena raised the point before that when traditional diesel millers are asked about a solar mill, they value throughput as a really important metric. But to make a solar mill that has the same throughput as a diesel mill is a completely unviable prospect. So there needs to be a bit of a paradigm shift about how solar milling or off-grid milling is going to work, and through that there needs to be a bunch of different solutions that develop. They will fit different contexts and different customer segments. There's going to be technologies for mini grids. There needs to be technologies for standalone solar, some for commercial use, some for domestic use, and others serving different agricultural products and meeting different local preferences. So without doubt, the next most important revolution in the energy access will be driven by agriculture, just like it has been in the past, whether that was in Europe and the US a century ago or Vietnam in the 1980s. And I love this picture on the right-hand side, which comes from a US government campaign from the 1930s through the 1950s to educate rural farmers about how energy can be used for productive services. So, with that in mind, it's going to take a huge coordinated effort both between the energy sector and the agricultural sector to really harmonize and bring this that depth of knowledge and skills and resources together to figure out this big and important problem. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Really enlightening, and I'm sure there'll be many questions at the end. I just want to now dive a little bit into solar water pumping. So here I want to flip it and start with the opportunity that exists, and then talk about why we're not realizing that opportunity. So this is an old technology. It's been around since the 70s. It's established. There's players in the market that are established, and the users understand the base technology, just like with milling. There are newer small-scale models that are really targeting smallholder farmers that have come distance, and increasingly there's financing being offered with these pumps, and they're getting smarter. So the integration of IoT, remote monitoring, and even feedback back to the farmers through these platforms is happening. And then the upfront costs, though they are higher than diesel alternatives, for example, the lifetime costs are pretty low in if you compare them to diesel. So for example, the capital cost of a diesel pump is around $200 and $600 for a solar water pump. But when we go to the lifetime cost—
Makena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're going in and out a little bit. Would you be able to get a little bit close to the internet connection?
Yes, let me try. Is this better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just saying that diesel pumps will probably come in at around $200 and solar water pumps at around $600, but you can pay off a solar water pump within 12 to 18 months, right? So like the running costs of the solar water pumps and the lifetime cost is just much lower, which presents a great opportunity in cash constrained households or with farmers. Next slide, please. The other opportunity we have is that we are projecting the market to really expand for solar water pumping. We have seen it happen in Asia with in India and Bangladesh with some subsidies and ongoing government interventions. And so we do see that this is a technology that really has great market potential. So that you can see the figures there for the addressable market in sub-Saharan Africa and how it's set to really increase, triple almost by 2030. So by all modeling that we have done and others have done, that trajectory looks up even though the figures might vary. And just to note that the slide for India shows a decline because there's anticipation that the subsidies that exist for solar water pumping will be removed. Next slide, please. So I think this is the slide I want to spend a little bit of time on because it just shows how the potential exists, but some of the things that are coming in the way of realizing that potential. So we've seen that, we know that the price has gone down. In the last 2 decades, by about 80%, there is great market potential. Farmers do look for this product, or like they believe that, if they were to irrigate their crops, they would increase their productivity. When we have interviewed 400 farmers in East Africa who have solar water pumps, 75% of them reported that their productivity increased, and 82% of them said that their quality of life had improved. But there remains very few sales in the market. So by last count, using the Goyal sales data collection that now also includes appliance sales, only about 6,000 pumps have been sold in East Africa in 2019. By the modeling projections, only about 0.5% of existing smallholder farmers in Africa will be able to afford a pump by 2030. And even where, for example, pumps have been bought, we're seeing that 75% of people are irrigating the same size of land that they used to before they had the pump. Farmers are needing extra income, so they're participating in off-farm activities to supplement their incomes, and the poverty reach is a little bit, lacking. So the solar water pumps that are being sold right now are typically hitting higher income farmers. So only 25% of those purchasing, this is of the 400 that we interviewed in East Africa, were below the poverty line. So just to think about what some of the reasons why they are not scaling as expected. So I think the big ticket items here are the business models. So we're seeing a lot of vertical integration through solar home system companies who are then onboarding these plans. And that is not seemingly a model that is very attractive to investment. So we're seeing actually investment shifting towards people who are more like distributors and quite specialized companies or distributors. There's also a lack of awareness of the technology among farmers. So in that survey I was talking about, 64% of the solar water pumping customers had owned a solar lighting product, but many of them had not heard of solar water pumping until they, came to buy the pump themselves, which seems, like a big gap. And then in India, 21% of farmers had not heard about a solar water pump before the government subsidy scheme came into effect. So there's a huge lack of awareness of the possibility of this technology, and then it's still not affordable. So financing is going to be crucial, because even though the lifetime cost is low, the price of even the small scale pumps can sometimes be equivalent to 6 to 12 months of income for a typical farming household, which is can be almost unachievable to just kind of lay down that deposit or be able to afford the pump in the first place. And then in terms of the potential that exists in productivity that isn't being realized, some of the issues here are around how to target the right customer and be able to predict that this is going to be a customer whose productivity will increase. So we're not, the sector isn't yet able to really pinpoint how productivity might improve by inclusion of a solar water pump and the variance between consumers, so that the right customer can be targeted with the right intervention, whether a solar pump, but sometimes other agricultural interventions that are not a solar water pump might be the deciding factor. So that ability to predict productivity is lacking. Obviously, there are issues around water access and the sustainability of that access. We find that, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 20% of people who use solar water pumps are using groundwater sources, so underground water sources, which tend to be more reliable. A lot of users are using surface water, which is, very fluctuates quite a lot with seasons. And then really, solar water pumps are only meeting one or a few of the totality of a farmer needs. And all those needs need to be met to get to productivity. And that really goes well into my next slide, please. So just here to highlight that really, really important point that a solar water pump is just one of the inputs that kind of enable farming productivity. So you can see that in terms of irrigation, it kind of hits that really well, but you also need water storage, you need irrigation materials, which sometimes can be sold together with the pump, but sometimes not. In terms of information about the climate and weather, sometimes that's included when we have pumps that are enabled with IoT and remote monitoring that can kind of feeds back information to farmers, but that's not always the case, and actually that's a minority of pumps. And then access to financing, yes, for solar water pumps that does exist in some instances, typically through these vertically integrated companies, but there needs to be really more third-party finances and more distributors. And without all these other based on training, guidance to farmers, equipment, then it's really unlikely that solar water pumps alone will be able to help farmers realize all the productive gains that they could. And just on top of that, when we add irrigation to a farmer's kind of way of working, we're introducing complexity that we have to also help them to deal with and to kind of integrate in the way that they practice farming. Next slide, please. So quickly here on what can we learn and what can we do. I think we need to pull quite a few levers to make solar water pumping scale and meet the potential they have for impact. You know, government policy needs to be broadened. So solar water pumps have to really be integrated in agendas that are focusing on agriculture, right? We have to create a policy that policy environment that has incentives, both physical and non-physical, for solar water pumping manufacturers and distributors. Innovative finance has a role to play. I guess we talked a lot about like financing is available. We've seen pay-as-you-go have some really interesting wins, but also we need to expand the consumer financing because affordability remains a problem. The technology and the products have to be adapted. So that just goes to filling the other farmer needs that are in excess of water. So how can we adapt the product offering and the technology offering to try and meet some of those other needs? For example, by integrating the Internet of Things, or being able to predict and model out what farmers can anticipate, and then feeding that back to help them adjust their practices. And then crucially, stakeholder partnerships, brokering the right partnerships along the value chain, and even within enabling environments, for example, agricultural sector, programs that are targeted to farmers. And those kind of things need to be linked together with the energy side of the equation, to just get these touch points and get more of those actors working together. And of course, consumer awareness will really bring out that latent demand that we see in solar water pumping. Next, please. And I'll just hand over now to Richa to go through what we're doing on sustainable irrigation.
Thanks, Makena. So this is a work in progress LEIA research and helps complete the solar water pump dialogue. One of our responsibilities as energy access practitioners is also to anticipate any unintended consequences of our interventions early on and to plan for its mitigation. For solar water pumps, the obvious one is to avoid the risk of over water abstraction, as the power is free, and without incentives to use power judiciously, there is bound to be a rebound effect leading to water overuse. This research is exactly about this, which is to evaluate the level of risk there may be in an African context, and to make some broad-based recommendations that can be taken up by various energy access practitioners as part of solarization of irrigation efforts. This risk is not just environmental, but also economic. If the aquifer is depleted, the farmer may not be able to recoup his investment on the pump. I want to start with citing quick evidence to suggest that the Indian depleting aquifer problem is led by overexploitation of groundwater resources for irrigation needs. A lot of you may have heard from news or other media that in India, a big majority of aquifers will 30% aquifers are already at risk and 60% likely at risk in the next 10 years or so. So in India, 90% of groundwater withdrawal is for irrigation. This large dependence on groundwater for irrigation is because of availability of cheap and unmetered power for irrigation from utility grid in several states. Solarization of pumping is similar to this problem in India of having on-grid pumps with flat, cheap tariffs, because solar system does not have fuel costs, and unless it is a leasing type model, all the power is free, which would then lead to overexploitation of water. Next slide, please. This piece of scoping note that we hope to take out by August is us trying to look ahead and avoid an unintended consequence of overexploitation of aquifers due to unabated solar water pumping. There are many conflicting views on how serious a threat of over-abstraction of water might be in Africa. In India, water abstraction by pumps has led to a crisis stage in many states, as I said before. One could argue that in India, India has millions of pumps of installations. A 2019 estimate has at 30 million, with 21 million on-grid and another 9 million as diesel and 250,000 as solar water pumps, as compared to just few thousand pumps in Africa. And the scale is simply not comparable. At the same time, there is a simultaneous climate narrative where more and more erratic rainfall and prolonged droughts have started to appear in many African countries, which can exacerbate the problem early on. However, a recent paper published in Nature last year challenges some of the risk to decreased resilience of groundwater resources in sub-Saharan Africa to climate variability, suggesting that as aridity increases or as prolonged drought increases, there is more focused groundwater recharge. In less technical words, what this basically means is that while overall precipitation may be lower in the whole year due to a drought, but intense precipitation, when it does happen, leads to more groundwater recharge to make up for any depletion losses. We also have some anecdotal evidence from companies installing solar water pumps in drought-prone regions, for example, in northern Uganda, suggesting that droughts do not necessarily mean that water tables are going down, just that the water needs to be moved more laterally instead of vertically by a pump. So in our view, there is mixed evidence to be expected. And one of the aims of this scoping paper would be to navigate all of this conflicting evidence and try and make some sense of it to provide some balanced assessment of risk. A last and third goal of this scoping paper will be that whatever the level of risk might be, it is prudent that if we start to build sound water conservation practices along with solarization of irrigation from the get-go, then we would have already put our efforts in Africa on the path of sustainable irrigation as the sector starts to scale, which is what the intention of our program is. And to that end, this piece will make some broad-based recommendations on what types of interventions could be adopted by various stakeholders to prevent scenarios where an aquifer might be at risk. These recommendations will be across policy, example, making incentives conditional on adopting rainwater harvesting practices, or monetizing solar power by letting surplus power feed back into the grid and giving farmers FITs in big peak grid scenarios, exploring traditional artificial recharge practices, across technological solutions like remote monitoring of pump use and withdrawal levels, or modeling to determine annual water budgets that can be harvested sustainably. Even business model solutions, example, artificially monetizing the solar power being used by irrigation by bundling agricultural loads at community scale where feasible. Let's say by using surplus solar power of irrigation for powering alternative loads like mills, cold storage, battery charge, etc. I would end by saying that since we're still closing the scope of this research and a lot of it is internal research with the help of an aquifer expert. If you have any feedback on how the scope of this research could be made more useful, please do reach out. Over to you, Makena.
Thanks, Richa. And now just to wrap up, bringing our kind of concentration back up to the totality of agricultural technologies for productive use, and just a quick summary here, that we really see a lot of diverse constraints in this market, and they range all the way from energy constraints and also agricultural oriented constraints. And these are across, demand for the appliance, the supply, and even the enabling environment. And so despite the fact that we understand there is huge potential here for growth and a really big addressable market, we need to solve these problems, and not in isolation as the energy sector or the agricultural sector, but really come together to solve some of these issues and constraints that are limiting agtech. So in the next slide, please, a couple of high-level findings is that, in terms of, or aside from milling and solar water pumping, where, people have started to sort out the business cases, a lot of the other agtech solutions don't have a clear-cut case for the farmer, because it's really expensive. Sometimes the utilization is low. There's that kind of volatility in how they use the equipment, and that doesn't really present a clear-cut case. There are suggestions that aggregation would be a really good idea in terms of mitigating some of that challenge, and also the challenge of affordability, and also the challenge of energy access at the very last mile. We keep seeing kind of very little alignment in how development is progressing, or at least the development agendas of different countries around pumping or around agriculture and energy together. And we feel that this is sort of a missed opportunity to align the development agenda of these two really important sectors, because that really might be the key to unlocking agricultural technology for productive use. And really looking to development actors, policymakers to make that switch and to make those connections to unlock that demand. Next slide, please. So as a development actor or a government actor, what can you do to help? The integration of initiatives in energy access and agriculture is really important, whether it's for aggregating demands, for incentivizing, for technology adaptation, or for awareness raising. It's really important to kind of draw those links programmatically from the development of the program all the way to its execution. And then obviously support in terms of innovation around the technology, innovations around financing and appropriate business models are going to be really key. And lobbying or kind of having these conversations with policymakers about how to enhance the regulatory environment for these products, and especially where off-grid energy intersects with agriculture. What can be done from policymakers on both sides of the table to kind of make that regulatory environment a little bit easier to navigate, so that these sectors can work together. We talked about consumer education. That is really going to be key in increasing awareness of solar products or machinery, and the fact that a lot of the mechanical work that is being done on farms can be transformed into solarized kind of work. That is just not clear to farmers, and that's something that would really unlock the demand. And finally, quality assurance, which, you know, to protect customers, to be able to realize impact, because low quality typically means low lifetime, and therefore we might not reach the impact we want. And with all the experimentation and kind of testing that is going on, it's really key to maintain a base level of quality, a base level of some sort of standards that everybody can come around to protect consumers and also to kind of shore up our impact. And with that, really, that's the end of our presentation. I think I will hand over to Sarah to open it up to questions.
Thank you very much to our speakers for such an interesting and illuminating presentation. This is now the question and answer portion of the webinar, and we really want to make sure that we can encourage a free and flowing discussion. If you have a question, please could you use the raise my hand feature. And I believe that Stephen had a question, so would you like to ask that first? Stephen,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll just put it in the Q&A, but it was just on the cost comparisons for the milling. There's a single sort of dollar amount per technology, and I was just a bit, was that the kind of cost, the capital cost, or does that include operating cost? Because obviously, I think you've done that more for the solar wash pumping, but the cost kind of the operation cost over time tends to favour the renewable technologies compared with diesel, and vice versa for capital.
That was the capital cost, and it was averaged out for what we find available in the market. It's true when you consider operational costs, that would bring that down lower, but we hadn't done, in the study, we hadn't done that modeling. But I believe there is a study that has been done by A4I that kind of shows that fact, that over time, with the amount of repairs needed on the diesel machine, with the purchase of diesel, the operational costs are lower with an electric mill. In that case, it was an electric mill on a mini grid.
Thank you, Makena. Over to you, Jeffrey. Jeff, I believe you had a question.
I think he has to be unmuted. You can't unmute yourself, I don't think.
I've unmuted him. I'm just trying to address that. Thank you. Okay. Okay, well, I've just sent Jeff a message. We might need to, sorry, just one moment. Oh, sorry. He's just lost sound, so I might just move on to the next person and hope that Jeff regains his sound. Over to you, Undala.
I think Undala is also having a problem with her mic. So maybe people can use the mic and or type the questions and we can respond in either of those ways.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Makena. Okay, I'll just unmute everyone. Sorry about this, just bear with me. Okay, I've just unmuted everyone, so people should be able to ask questions. Undala or Jeffrey, would you, actually, is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? I'm so sorry, would you be, yes, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if Undala or Jeff have their mic issues. I just wanted to ask a quick question, Matt. I was interested to, hear the story and, obviously been interesting to follow how you've been getting on. Can you say anything about how the mini-grid companies are reacting to this offer? I know that you've also been doing a bit of work with cross-boundary, and I saw a thing they released recently on this solar milling side. Yeah, could you say a bit of how are the mini-grid companies reacting and how do you see that market compared with the direct to customers and the smaller market from your company's perspective?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah. So we didn't really do much with cross-boundary. We were doing some work with Factor E and and PowerGen direct. So yeah, and that kind of that piece of work kind of stemmed out, or just to use it as a opportunity to tell a story, stemmed out from the fact that PowerGen and Factory with Cross Boundary and I believe Rockefeller support had done this project around trialing some mills, which had originally started with Factory doing the work in Colorado. They got some very promising results in Colorado using American corn in that testing, and then they stepped up and ordered 10 of those machines and had them shipped out to Tanzania, and they were immediately universally rejected by the market. So again, it's just even the lowest hanging fruit of retrofitting machines comes with its kind of complications and local permutations around what's going to be accepted and what's not. So we got involved. We then got involved, being friends with Factory and with PowerGen. We got involved with helping those guys optimize that machine, and then using that machine platform as the optimizing that machine platform, which it's not necessarily rocket science, but it just requires a bit of knowledge, and just highlights this fact that you can't just go straight to Alibaba and find something, or go straight to the Canton Fair and find something that you can just plug into market. We are doing so. Apart from our ongoing that relationship, both with Factory and PowerGen, we're working with a couple of other mini grid partners here. We've got mills out in Western Kenya with 2 mini grid developers, and so far so good. It's fairly early days. We implemented them in late February onto their grids, the first trial products, and in the new world regime of COVID, it's been difficult to get out there. I'm in Nairobi. I can't travel out of Nairobi now. But the reports are good, and early indications are good. Our challenge is just to package those products a little bit better. Is some of the feedback that's coming back. But it's all looking pretty positive. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks very much. Jeffrey Prince now has sound again. So Jeff, would you like to ask your question? Okay, well, I'll just ask the question on his behalf, unless you have sound, Jeff. Okay, not a problem. Jeff has asked, have the milling pumping cases explored the combination of long-term finance with better market linkages? So if we take a bad example, such as a coal-fired powered plant, it's not official and renewable, but has long-term finance and a dedicated marketplace or fixed customers typically to ensure they can sell kilowatts per hour.
I'll go first, then Matt, I'd be curious to hear if you know of any. So I don't know any ongoing sort of long-term interventions where there's long-term financing external to the organization that's coupled with kind of this connection to market. I know that on the cooling side, a couple of companies have tried that, where they have this really great links to off-taking of the produce, and then provide the cooling as a service, which consumers are more able to afford. But I haven't come across any examples where there's that kind of like long-term injection of finance, either by a government or a donor or someone, coupled with that market linkage.
Thanks, Makena.
Yeah, I can't say I'm familiar with any long-term finance. There was a solar milling project done down in Zambia, which were on the face of it, on the numbers, that looks totally unsustainable. These are large solar mills. They were costed at $70,000 per mill, a 25 kilowatt mill, and that had some kind of financing arrangement through the government and the Chinese beneficiary. But as far as the solar milling, whether that be standalone solar or mini grid kind of sector, I'm not familiar with any financing, long-term financing arrangements.
Thanks very much, Matt. I believe Undala had a question.
Thank you for bearing with me. It's to do with the solar pumping and taking on. I appreciate you trying to learn from the South Asian experience, and it's not just India, it's also Pakistan and other parts of South Asia that are facing this problem. If solar pumping in Africa is to reach this kind of scale that South Asia has, then the problems will be the same or very similar, because as you've already noted, that the absence of having to pay for fuel removes the handbrake. So I just wanted to flag that there is, DFID funded the British Geological Society a few years ago to do a map of the groundwater in Africa, and that atlas is available. So please, when you think you're looking at groundwater and you're looking to upscale, I appreciate that not all the solar pumping is groundwater, but it will become so over the course of the coming years probably. So please do think about where it's suitable to be used, and when you're just marketing the pumps, that they are marketed in the right places, and so that it's part of the consumer information as to where to pump and where not to. Because the worst case would be that we do create a really bad situation, though it was unintended. Oh, and I'll send the link to the speakers.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question?
I can start, and then maybe Richa can. Jen, I fully appreciate that, Undala. I think this is one of the reasons why we wanted to really have a look at sustainable irrigation and see what we can learn and what we can, some of the consequences that we can avoid, and also inform the way in which we are sort of catalyzing solar water pumps in the market. So for example, we do have a resource-based financing program for solar water pumping. And in the feedback we get from consumers, we include questions about the long-term usage of water, any climatic effects that they're seeing. We're trying to really get a handle on how big of a problem is this likely to be, if it is, how big is it likely to be, and what can we do as we continue to kind of support development of the solar water pumping sector to make sure that we kind of navigate those problems better. So Richa is kind of leading this project, so I'll be curious to also hear what she has.
I actually missed the first half of the question, but about groundwater atlas, Undala, that's definitely a resource I have looked at, and it will be included as part of the recommendations in terms of the resources that are already available and should be used. So I don't know if that was your question, but yeah, we definitely have our eyeballs on it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Makena and Richa. Would anyone else have a question? Please do feel free to either raise your hand and ask the question, or submit it by the Q&A function if that's not available to you. I believe that Leo Blythe of Energy Saving Trust and IFC has a question, so I'll just pose that to the panelist. He says, the session began by framing solar water pumping and milling as having high levels of market readiness. Could you clarify the level of maturity of the refrigeration sector in this regard? Although current off-grid focus is clustered in smaller refrigerators, it could be argued that it is highly mature when considering both grid-powered cold chain and also ice-making facilities.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, I mean, and interestingly, we're going to have another webinar in this series that focuses on cooling. So that's gonna bring this out in much more detail. But yes, we have seen examples of, especially grid-tied, cold chain infrastructure that is starting to make a difference. We know that the cold chain in sub-Saharan Africa is lacking, and the huge need for efficient or like effective cold chains in this geography especially. There is a lot of focus in terms of ag tech. There is some focus in community-owned cold stores or individually owned refrigeration units for preserving food, but also for light commercial usage. And also a lot of activity in the pay-as-you-cool sector, where you have off-grid cold storage facilities, which is kind of a focus of one of our other work, which is the off-grid cold chain challenge. So I think in terms of technology maturity, the technology exists that is grid-powered. It hasn't penetrated, or at least these cold chain technologies haven't really penetrated the region in a way that would be, that I guess we would all like. But there continues to be efforts to see if there are off-grid alternatives, especially for what I guess is being termed the first mile, when the agricultural product comes straight off the farm to the first point into the cold chain. There, with the lack of energy, really an off-grid solution is going to be key. So I know there's quite a lot of people looking at that. We are trying to look at that as well. But I hope that has kind of answered your question. The technology is there. The adaptation to off-grid hasn't been done in any meaningful way and is needed.
Okay, thanks very much, Makena. I believe Stephen has a question now, so I will just unmute him. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, this was a sort of a question about the energy and agriculture links. And I guess the market change, I guess those of us working on energy are reasonably familiar with that for energy. But this, I just would be interested to know, maybe from Matt, and you haven't had a solar water pumping company on this, but what do the kind of distribution channels look like for these kind of products? And how are you kind of reaching farmers basically? And what's the kind of engagement like from some of the agricultural extension sort of programs or the kind of the existing companies, the 1 acre funds, these kind of things? What are the routes to market, and how well is that working, and which of those are interested in engaging with these newer technologies?
Yeah, thanks, David. So with our 2 product ranges right now, we with our larger kind of village scale, what we refer to our village scale mills that operate in the 1 to 2 kilowatt range. They're either for mini grids or for larger solar systems. We go straight to the mini grid developers, or we go straight to some of the solar companies that build these larger systems, like institutional systems. So, then we would be targeting, say, for example, a school that might have a solar system. But our model is very much a B2B model. We've been chatting with one of the one of the mini grid partners we're working with is PowerHive. And, we've been chatting with them about, well, it's all early stages right now, but how to go about this, this is kind of the question you posed. And, from our side, we don't want to be the company providing consumer. We all recognize that consumer finance is important. These kind of village scale machines are really hard to put in those kind of lock mechanisms, like lockout mechanisms that could make them truly kind of pay-go. So, we we're not really prepared to take the risk of financing a product like that. One, we're not capable of doing it now, but really we're not connected enough with the customer. And plus a mini grid developer may, they're kind of saying to us, they don't necessarily want to power and not be sending people in to repossess assets. So this is a complicated piece that hasn't been worked out yet, and I'm just kind of talking about the mini grid side at the moment. Is how this how this is managed, and with the partners that we're talking to, we're looking to develop the links with third-party financiers who can perhaps kind of be the bad guys when it they've got the skill set. It's what they do for it's what they do for their bread and butter is financing products, and also be the bad guys if there's some kind of defaulting mechanism. As far as the micro mill, which is kind of more of a standalone solar product, we are really looking to again with a B2B model, partnering with off-grid solar power distributors. At the moment, we've got specifically one partner we are actively working with, where we've got another 6 we have kind of partnered with, but one we're trying to kind of concentrate our work for the time being with a fabulous purely last mile distribution company. They've got no interest in product. They've got no interest in product development. They are purely all about last mile distribution, and they're the kind of partners that we will be looking to work with here in Kenya. And then as we expand, we would be looking to partner up with similar companies in other countries. The other point of your question around the tapping into that agricultural network, this is something admittedly we are really poor at. There was a point in one of my slides about building this greater interconnection between the two networks, between the two sectors, agriculture and energy. And I come from an energy background. I'm quite comfortable in the energy space, but we have very poor links with the agriculture space. It's it's a little bit of my bad, I suppose, but it also kind of highlights some of the challenge in the work that we're trying to do that straddles these two sectors. So there was a point of kind of a bit of a call of arms. If we can draw in and pull in the agri sector more into this kind of combined effort that we're all working towards, I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
And just to add a little bit there, I think that coordination is key. I think there are 3 ways or more, maybe more, that we could do. We should co-convene so that we are talking together about successes, failures, challenges. I think we should co-create programs with agricultural sector experts so that the projects have both an energy point of view and an agriculture point of view. And I think we should co-fund. So in our funding of productive use that has a component of agriculture, I think we should also in there think through funding the other bits that are outside of the energy intervention.
Thanks very much, Makena. I also wanted to add that Efficiency for Access Secretariat on a whole is very keen to expand our engagement with other agricultural stakeholders. We'd love to hear your thoughts, well, both the audience and the panelists' thoughts on other organizations we should prioritize engagement with. Would anyone like to say anything about that?
Yeah, well, I will. Having worked for an international NGO previously, that had 3 different kind of sectors we worked in, and 2 of them were energy and agriculture. And agriculture is such a complicated sector because of all some of the things that were kind of being highlighted through the course of this webinar, the local preferences that change. The people even within 50 kilometers from the western border of Kenya, you go 50 kilometers west into Uganda, and people want a completely different type of maize flour, which requires different, mechanical processes. And the business as usual case right now on how people access those access that flour is it's quite different. It's quite a different market and how it all operates. So there's some deep knowledge that people, that specialists have within the agricultural sector that would be very beneficial to broadly to all of us who are here on this webinar today, but certainly to a company like Agsol. If we could kind of tap into that knowledge, those networks, that's critically important for us. Meanwhile, we're looking, we're fielding emails and inquiries of interest from West Africa. And again, we start to look at quite a very different market. It operates very differently. There's different unit economics. There's different products and processes that are required. So from being an energy sector guy for the last 15 plus years and having moved into this agriculture space with Agsol, I can see that it gets a lot more complicated very quickly once you include this agricultural component, and pulling in the specialists in that sector. I think, just to echo what Makena said, is going to be a really key piece of the puzzle.
Thanks very much for that. Please do raise your hand if you'd like to make any comments or ask any questions. Or alternatively, please do submit your question via the Q&A feature. Okay. All right. Well, it appears that our time is up. So I just wanted to hand over to Makena for some closing remarks.
Really, for me, it's just to thank you all for participating in this. I think, when I mentioned the idea of co-convening, we need to sit in the same rooms to talk about the challenges on both sides, because really what we are all trying to do is achieve some level of productive impact for low-income communities and households, and to enable the energy access spaces to meet its impact goals, we need the agricultural space and vice versa. So just thank you for participating in this webinar, and also to thank the panelists, Richa, Matt, thanks for sharing your experience and also the programmatic work. There will be a poll at the end of the webinar. So once this closes down, please let us know what we could do better, or just respond to those questions. Otherwise, thank you and goodbye.